You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody, and do we have a great guest for you tonight? Yes, we do. That is the answer to that, and I am also blurry, so I hate this new camera. I'm sorry, I will get that fixed. We had a great weekend recently at the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival. We're going to talk to you all about that before we get a guest on, and hopefully you've seen some of the videos popping around, and we're going to fill you in on those videos. But first of all, we check in for the week. So after a big weekend, Chris, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, I'm good. I've really enjoyed the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival. If people haven't been watching this, you definitely need to get yourself there at some point. It's such a unique festival. Obviously, all your favorite crime writers are there. Just mingling with people. You can go up to them, you can have a chat, you can get books signed. It's such a beautiful part of the world as well. And there's so many things for you to do. I think I ate my body weight in kebabs.
You did.
But yeah, it's brilliant. It's, you know, if you're into crime fiction, or even if you're not, even if you just love reading, everyone's smiley, happy. It's like the highlight of the year. We spoke to Mark Billingham on his 25th anniversary of 25 bestsellers, and he said it's the first thing that he puts in his calendar every single year. So, you know, if you've not been, you need to go. If you've not checked out the videos yet, go back and have a little look at them, because we've got some great interviews in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm wearing a T-shirt, Peter James, the hawk that died. This T-shirt was the Pam McMillan T-shirt they were wearing, and they gave us one to promote his new book. We spoke to some amazing people. We had some great times. We invented some great games, Chris, that we won't talk about here. Maybe in the after party, we will indeed do that. And also the amazing press passes that we get given for the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival, which is wonderful to get, because, you know, it gives us access to everywhere. As Chris said, Mark Billingham, 25 years, 25 bestsellers, is on the lanyard this year as well. And it was an incredible festival, meeting so many people and networking. What we talked about on the show before is that if you're an author that is looking to kind of promote yourself as more in a business term, then going to these amazing festivals is a great networking opportunity for you. And you'll meet authors, you'll meet readers, you'll meet publishers, and everybody in the industry. And it's a great way for you to get yourself out there. And as much as so many of us want to sit behind the desk, or, you know, sit in our little corner in the dark and write our stories, you need to kind of push that boat out if you want to take your book to the next level. So these festivals, it might seem daunting, but the fact that we went to a party on the Thursday night, which was invented or created for people who haven't met before, to go prior to the festival to meet up and have drinks, was such a great evening for us, to the point where I spent the Friday doing interviews with a terrible hangover. But it's such a great opportunity, and people are there reading their books. So it's a great way to showcase yourself as who you are. And I think if you've never done it, if it's a local festival on a small scale, or something like the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival, or anywhere, take that risk and put yourself out there, because it could really be beneficial to you for an author's career.
Yeah, definitely. And there's one story I'll tell you. On the Thursday night, I was with a big group of writers. We were walking around causing a little bit of chaos at the festival, and I saw one of my heroes, which is C.K. McDowell.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God. So I walked up to him, and they say never meet your heroes, but he was absolutely lovely. And I chatted to him for about 2 hours, him and his wife, and he was exactly how I imagined he would be in real life. He was really funny and charismatic, and he actually gave me a proof of his new book as well, which is not even out until October. So I was absolutely ecstatic with that. So yeah, do go to the Crime Writers Festival. Do meet your heroes. They are lovely people. And yeah, you'll have a great time.
Well, they do say that, Chris, that, you know, people who write dark stories, who write crime and all of those sort of things that are a little bit nasty, tend to be the nicest people in the industry. And it does seem to be that way. So many people that we met were so nice, so approachable, and have so much advice. So yeah, just reinforcing that idea of getting yourself out there and mingling with these people, because it's fantastic. Yeah.
And speaking of great crime writers, we've just carried on the trend. We spoke to a load of great crime writers at the weekend, and now we've got another great crime writer on the show today as well. So exciting times.
Yes, we do. So with that in mind, I will introduce tonight's guest. And throughout this show, please, if you're watching this back and not live, hit the like button. It will help other people, like-minded people, like and find the show. Leave a comment and share the show if you can do that, because it will help us all. So I will introduce our guest, and throughout the show, please throw your questions in. And remember, at the end, there's a dedicated question segment, which you can then send your questions in as well. So for right now, I'll introduce our guest, and please give her a nice warm welcome. So tonight's guest is the Sunday Times and internationally best-selling author of 18 gripping novels. Incredible. Blending suburban settings with psychological suspense that keeps readers hooked. Known for Our House, which has sold over 250,000 copies and has become an award-winning ITV drama, she has built a career as one of the UK's top voices in crime and domestic noir fiction. Her latest novel, A Nightmare's Guide to Murder, above Chris's head right there, other side, is an unlikely friendship that spirals into scandal and murder. Out now in hardback. And she joined us tonight to talk about her incredible journey, writing unforgettable characters, the art of suspense, and what it takes to stay at the top of a game after 20 years. So please give us a hand in giving her a nice warm welcome to the incredible, amazing Louise Candlish. Hello.
Hi, I feel exhausted after hearing that rundown. It's time for me to retire.
Absolutely. Well deserved, I'd say. Louise, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. And just feeling a little bit of residual FOMO hearing about Harrogate, which I didn't go to this year. Normally I would go. And this year, for those who don't know, every year there's a guest programmer, and it was Mick Herron this year. So I knew it was going to be really special and brilliant. Yeah. And it sounds like it was, but unfortunately I missed it.
You did.
But next year I'll be back, I think.
But you were also longlisted this year as well.
Yeah, I was. And actually they have a thing where if you're shortlisted, you have to go. You have to commit to going to the festival.
Oh, wow.
And so I did have something that I kind of, sort of kept on the back burner in case I was shortlisted. But when I discovered I wasn't, I made the decision to sort of do the plan A. But yeah, I've yet to be shortlisted. I've been longlisted 3 times, and that's kind of a bit of a Harrogate thing, a bit of a Theakston's Prize thing. You'll get people who've been, longlisted or shortlisted multiple times, and they can't quite get the prize.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's see.
So it's amazing to even get longlisted, but we'll get into that soon. But first of all, where are you from in the world right now, so we people watching can find out?
I'm in South London, so I live in Herne Hill, which is on the borders of Brixton, which is probably a bit better known. So South London, in the kind of zone 2 inner suburbs of London.
Yeah, and my favorite question to ask people coming on the show is always about the connection in real life, because we are basically a online community, and that is quite apparent to a lot of readers' lives. But what we want to know is there ever a point where you turn that into a real life community? Do you meet people in the community where you live that are writers or readers that connect with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always hope to do local events with each book. And I have a kind of, annual tradition of going to my local library, which is Carnegie Library, and doing an event there with each new publication, which have I done that? Yeah, I think I've done that already. And yeah, and the local bookshops I will, support as much as I can. And there are, I mean, all of London, tends to have quite a lot of writers and creative people, but Southeast London, where I am, particularly because it was traditionally a bit cheaper and not as kind of swanky as, West London or North London. So, living very close by to me, I have Mark Rylance, the famous actor. And, I should add that we're all in terraced houses. This is not a millionaire's row at all. This is like just normal London living. And yeah, there's quite a few writers in the area, actually. So it's good. But I tend to not, the writers that I'm friends with tend to be, scattered. So I wouldn't say, we're meeting, regularly, locally. My friends locally aren't really in the business.
Yeah. But it's nice to actually have that connection, because most of the people we ask in that situation say that no, they don't really have that local connection. So it's nice to have, and I'm assuming London is that kind of place that would have that connection. So I think it is really kind of a nice thing and quite rare to have an in-life connection. But that's the same for a lot of authors who, in any sort of town or city they live in, could make that effort to go to libraries and go to places and put themselves out there to then build that sort of community in real life.
Definitely. I mean, particularly libraries. I mean, two things, libraries and independent bookshops. I think, it's our duty to support. And I know that there are loads of areas where there isn't a library anymore and they haven't got a bookshop anymore. Where my dad lives, actually, he buys all his books from Tesco, which is because that's the only place he can get books within range. Sometimes it's not possible and you might have to travel. But for me, my library is within walking distance, and I've got two bookshops, Dulwich Books and Village Books, that are within walking distance. And so it's really easy for me to just pop in and say hi and sign copies. And some titles are a bit more relevant to the local area, and take off locally. Because I don't name, although my books are sort of set in a neighborhood, not unlike mine is kind of how I pitch it. I don't actually call it by my local neighborhood, and I draw together lots of different elements of Southeast London and Southwest London areas, and then I create this composite into a new fictitious area. So, but sometimes it feels very relevant to the local area. And, like my book, The Swimming Pool, for instance, was, fairly transparently based on Brockwell Lido, which is the outdoor pool, which is literally at the end of my road. And anyone who knew me and knew where I lived would know that that's what it was based on. So that was a good one to promote locally. But then sometimes, something like Our Holiday, which was my release last year, that was, unusually for me, not set in London, and the characters were on the South Coast. So, that maybe didn't have quite the same resonance locally. But, I love meeting local book lovers and readers. So yeah, it's a no-brainer, really.
Have you?
Sorry. I was going to say, one of the things we like to do on the show is, obviously, we know how successful you are. We know how many books you've written, but we always like to go back to the sort of original point in terms of like how writing became an important thing in your life. So could you take us back there if you could? Do
you mean back to childhood, or do you mean once I was an adult? Well, I was always a reader as a child, and unusually probably for an author, I can pinpoint when I first started writing, because it was linked to juvenile crime. I was a bit of a juvenile delinquent, or could have gone that route. And I got in trouble with the police. I was probably 11 or 12. I think I was about 12. And my parents, I was cautioned by the police. I was in this sort of shoplifting ring of, young scallywags. And my parents were obviously extremely angry and shocked and, disappointed. And they grounded me for a whole school summer holiday, which is 6 weeks, as we know. And that was when I started reading properly and writing. And around that time, my older sister and I started writing a novel each. Hers was much better than mine. And also hers was typed up on a typewriter, which was her typewriter. So mine was handwritten in pen on paper with illustrations. I always illustrated everything. And so, yeah, I mean, recently, actually, I did an interview where we discussed some of my school stories which I'm so glad I've kept them because they are genuinely hilarious, real melodramas, with, you know, murders and, you know, sibling rivalry and, you know, school scandal. And so I see when I look back that I was taking any opportunity to do, you know, to write creatively and to create stories. And you can see all the influences as well, Agatha Christie being the main one. So yes, so I wrote a lot when I was young, and then I didn't really write anything from about the ages of 16 to early 30s, other than writing related tasks at work. So I was always in a kind of writing adjacent job. So I worked as a copywriter, I worked as a magazine editorial assistant, I worked in nonfiction books as an editor. So I always had a kind of editorial sort of job. And so, you know, so I was creating content, I suppose, but I was never writing fiction ever. And then, and I think it's because I was so busy and it was the 90s and I was partying really hard. I just didn't, you know, there was no way I was going to, you know, work full time and then spend my evenings and weekends doing a second job. I didn't have that passion to write at all then. And then when I took a career break of 2 months and went backpacking, and immediately became bored, and at the same time had an idea for a story. And so I just started writing it again in a notebook with a pen. Didn't have a laptop with me or anything like that. This was before smartphones and, you know, notes apps and stuff like that. And that book ended up being my first published book. So that was how it began, just, you know, quite quickly and smoothly, actually, in the beginning.
I love that. I don't think we've ever had a crime writer on the show that has directly been involved in crime. That has then...
I bet you have. They maybe just haven't told you. Yeah.
Well, that's a brilliant story. So without the crime, obviously you might not be here today, which is great. So I don't condone shoplifting, but I do if it's going to make you a bestseller of multiple books.
Yeah. And can I just say that it wasn't, you know, we weren't stealing, you know, expensive things. We were probably stealing sweets and, you know, like makeup and stuff. But those were the days, this was, I guess, the 80s. And those were the days when the police were quite, you know, had a preventive role. Now, I think, you know, we can all agree it's quite hard to find the police when you need them, and people don't bother reporting quite serious crimes now. Yeah. But back then, they were much more embedded in the community. And so, you know, that it was part of their job was to deter young criminals. And they did a great job with me because I was on the straight and narrow after that. So, but yeah, there is a criminal origin story there, I'm ashamed to say.
I don't think you should be, because all of us have a past that make us who we are. And one thing that I always lean on when it comes to writing is the fact that I think life experience weighs very much heavily into the writing world, almost as much, if not more, than the kind of academic route into writing.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And, you know, I think it's two things really. One, reading a lot, and two, living a lot. I think you need both of those to be a writer. I don't think you need any other qualifications, but you just need to have something to write about and some perspective on life. And, you know, often when you read the work of a young person, including my own, you know, it's naive and, you know, it's really only suitable for a peer audience, because it's, you know, presumes so much ignorance. You need to have gained experience and knowledge, I think, to, you know, to start writing and to expect a range of age groups to read your work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I do really believe that all of the mistakes, all of the sins and crimes and blunders and transgressions and, you know, all of the kind of disappointments, I think, feed into good writing.
So here's a question for you then. If someone who's going through a bit of a troublesome life right now, perhaps similar to what you did or maybe worse, and, you know, they have no idea how to move forward and they're thinking, I've got a story in what I've been through, you know, and there's a lot of people that have gone through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What advice have you got for them to then approach that, to take that story of theirs and create a story that they could share with other people?
Well, I can think it depends on, you know, sort of if they've got any writing experience or have any clue at all how to structure a story. But you might start just with a journal and which you can either it can be 100% true, or you can sort of slightly fictionalize it, but just impose some kind of order on your thoughts, because I think most of us find that when we write stuff down, somehow we feel better about it, and we feel like we've got more of a grip of what it is that that the problem is. If you want to turn it into an actual short story or a novel, then you need to create a framework out of your experience. Think what the themes are, what you'd like to explore, create your characters. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be in your voice? Is it going to be first person and very much, have a memoir feel to it? Or would you like to remove your experiences and troubles from yourself and sort of project them onto a new person? But either way, you can gain some control and clarity over what you've experienced, I think. I absolutely view writing, even as a professional fiction writer, I view it as a form of therapy. It's a way of understanding the world, both your own personal world and society at large. And I genuinely believe that the experience for the writer is really similar to the experience for the reader. It's enjoying order and sort of somehow making sense of something that feels quite chaotic, I think, because we all feel chaotic sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Louise, you mentioned obviously the influence of Christie, and I'm just kind of wondering your editorial experience and then your reader experience of reading those types of novels. How did they sort of come together when you wrote that first novel?
I think my editorial experience wasn't really relevant, other than I had done quite a bit of travel writing by that point. And my first book was set in Italy. And actually, my first few books tended to have travel locations. And so yes, that would have been the influence of my day jobs. And then in terms of the Agatha Christie influence, I think that's just always been there. I think, she was the author I read when I was in my formative years. And I still see it now, even though, you might be hard pushed to sort of to see it if you didn't know the influence was there. I can see it and sense it all the time. The kind of my interest in, people who aren't following the rules and, cuckoos in the nest characters. I don't tend to do locked room situations. And certainly my first few books weren't crime anyway. But my first book, the one that was set in Italy, was set on a small island, and it was marketed as a rom-com, but it wasn't a rom-com to me. It was I thought it was comic, but I didn't think it was remotely romantic. It was basically a young woman stalking her ex on holiday with his new girlfriend, and just feeling, intensely jealous and sad, and meeting a collection of characters in her hotel, and kind of maybe not kind of leaving happier, but certainly having learned something about herself and having sort of given up on the ghost, I think. So it's quite hard to say. Well, I guess the influence, the Agatha Christie influence, then you could say was my love of island settings, because I've ended up setting quite a few books on islands, and I think that comes straight from things like Evil Under the Sun. That kind of that sense of traveling to a location, then you're cut off. Probably communications, aren't great. Certainly with my early books, we didn't really, I don't think she even had a mobile phone in that first story. I think a couple of them had those clam phones. Everything changed with iPhones, unfortunately, for writers. So yeah, I think a glamorous setting. What really appealed to me as a child in Northampton, which was not a very glamorous place. It's a town in the Midlands. Was the glamour of Agatha Christie. The idea that you could sail on a steamer ship up the Nile, and everyone was wearing beautiful costumes and lovely jewelry and had things worth stealing, and wealth worth killing for. I really loved that about Agatha Christie, and still do. I would say not a week goes by when I'm not listening to an Agatha Christie audiobook or dramatization. I tend to consume her books in audio now.
Yeah, one of the things I kept hearing at Harrogate from people who were talking about the writing side from a business was about having a blueprint for your novel. Do you, obviously having written so many books now, do you have like a blueprint in mind before you start?
Oh, I don't even know what that means. What would that mean? What do you mean by a blueprint?
I think a blueprint is like a certain structure in terms of that they like one of the things that was mentioned multiple times is if you're going to write for a business, and writing a crime novel is essentially writing for a business and an audience.
Yeah.
Somebody actually said to us, don't feel like you need to be original. Like, give them something that, like, you expect to see certain things in a crime novel, so don't deviate from that. Put those things in there, but put
See what you mean, like almost like a formula. Yeah.
Do you have that when you're writing now?
No, I'm anti-formulaic. I don't conform to that at all. And I think it is because I'm writing psychological thrillers. I'm not, I think if I was writing crime procedurals, it would be completely different. And I think I can see absolute value in having a blueprint then, because there's certain, expectations and conventions within that genre where I think that, you should be looking to satisfy the reader by supplying them. But with a psychological thriller or domestic noir, I think it's much looser. And actually, every single book I write doesn't have a blueprint. It's usually nothing like the one before. It's often in reaction to the one before because, I got bored, writing it because I love starting things and then, I don't like finishing things. So I'm ready for the new thing because that's the exciting bit for me. So it's often completely different. So so my new book has a single narrator. She's telling her story in the form of a sort of, I guess it's not really sophisticated enough to be a memoir, but it's her account written down by her. My previous book had 6 narrators. They were all in the third person. And, the whole thing was like world building. It was a whole resort on the South Coast. It was about second homeowners, but it was also about locals and the way they were living. And, it was like wrangling an octopus, that book. It was, it was but quite complicated, and it could have been 10 times the length it was, because each character I knew, as well as I would if there was just a single narrator. So they had a lot to share, and I had to, I was constantly reining them in so that there would be space for the next narrator. So by the end, I was starting to think, have I bitten off more than I can chew with 6 narrators? So, so when I came to plan this book, I thought, I'm keeping this simple. I'm having a small cast. I'm going to make the atmosphere claustrophobic. It's not going to be a big open sunlit world with all kinds of different houses and settings. It's going to be one building, and it's going to be one voice, and in direct opposition to what I'd done before. So I think I'm the opposite of someone who follows a blueprint.
Of that.
So definitely do love that. In that case, then, if someone was trying to write a psychological thriller and they were trying to do a good job of it, what advice could you give them? Like, if you had 3 strands of advice for them?
Oh my God. Well, I personally think voice is the most important thing. And obviously it's closely linked to character, but I think if you can nail the voice, whether it's in the first person or third person, I think you're always writing from someone's point of view, even if it's not direct first person in a psychological thriller, because you're inside someone's head, you're under their skin. You're not a sort of cold, authorial voice. You are the character. So you need to nail that character whose story you're telling, or characters. That's your first thing to do. So think a little bit about, about your characters. Lots of people will write character studies, or they'll interrogate their characters quite extensively before they start. Some people say that the characters come to them fully formed. I tend to sort of get their turns of phrase. I'll settle on the age, the gender, and their demographic. Perhaps I'll think a little bit about what their background has been. Are they privileged? Have they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps? Are they divorced? Have they suffered trauma? Have they led a charmed life? I'll get some of those basics in place, and then I'll launch straight in, and then the characters will develop from there. So I think try and spend a lot of time thinking about character and voice before you start. And then the other thing, if you're writing a psychological thriller, it will have a crime element. I mean, it might not be a classic murder or burglary or fraud, but there will be some, some dark psychological stuff. So have a think about what those themes are that you want to tackle. So you've got your voice and character, and then you've got your main themes. And then the other thing that people talk about all the time is the hook. And really all that is say to yourself, if I were a salesperson at a publisher trying to persuade Waterstones or Tesco's or WH Smith or an indie bookshop to stock this book, but they've only given me 30 seconds. How would I describe it in literally in a couple of sentences? So the elevator pitch. And I think it's really important because that's the reality of the business. If you want to be published, if you're not interested in being published and you're interested in writing for yourself, that's completely different. But if you're interested in getting your book published, you need to know how to crystallize that hook. And actually, sort of establishing that before you get underway is really helpful. Just as it's really helpful to have a title. And so many times I've not had an agreed title, and I've finished the book. And when you have got the title, it just really helps you, because the title normally will be at least alluding to a character, main character, or a main theme. So it helps you see what the most important thing is about the book. So yeah, best case scenario, if you can do those three things before you start, then I think that you've got the tools that you need to start writing.
I'd really want to ask something here, because we've had a lot of people describe how to develop characters on this show over 5.5 years, a lot of people. But no one has ever mentioned sort of going into the backstory as far as the trauma they may have experienced as a young person that would then dictate how they act as an older person, which is amazing to hear you say. But how then would you possibly describe that the acts that those characters are doing in the story has been a result of the trauma they experienced?
Well, in this book, A Neighbour's Guide to Murder, the narrator is 70 years old. And let's just say that she acts in a very ill-advised fashion when she discovers a rental arrangement, a sort of very sleazy rental arrangement is going on in the flat next door. She overreacts. She gets far too invested in a near stranger's life. She's a new friend, Pixie, the tenant next door, but she's, to all intents and purposes, a brand new friend and a stranger. Gwen doesn't know much about her. So, she's extraordinarily intense about it, and, and zealous about sort of, outing what the landlord is doing to Pixie, and and righting the wrong, getting justice. And so, automatically, you need to know why on earth would she be behaving like this. It's just not normal behavior, especially in London, where there's a level of anonymity and all kinds of crimes take place, and people have absolutely no idea, even though it's been, just on the other side of the wall. What I wanted to do in the present day plot sort of required me to think about how it could be that she has reached this point. Also, she's in a financial position that, she's quite perilous in her finances, and so she's lost out financially in a marriage. So that made me think a little bit about what happened in her marriage. She's divorced, but more importantly, what happened to make her so determined to do right by this young woman. And so it sort of came naturally to me that there must be a backstory where she has done wrong by a young woman in the past, or she has failed to come to her aid, when ideally she would have. She's full of regrets. She's someone who has masses of regrets. And so I kind of wanted to just think what those regrets would be. I didn't go back to her childhood at all in my thoughts. I couldn't tell you now even where in the country she grew up. So I'm not talking about that level of history, but I just thought about her life from around the time that she left college, say, and started working. I just thought what her career might have been, and where she might have met her husband. But with so much of character, it's not on the page.
Yeah.
But you need to know it yourself. So as with all kinds of research, I always know far more than I reveal to the reader. It's just not it's not necessary for the reader to know everything, and it can really slow things down if you're giving too much detail and backstory. So I try to do backstory with a very light touch. Less is more, but you want it to work quite hard, what you do give. So that's my position on that. But I don't mean that I'm putting together, pages and oops, sorry, let me just put out this. The laptop just moved away from me. I don't create, sort of big character studies and files, on the characters at all. But I do, but I need to know psychologically why they're behaving like they're behaving. It would be very unusual for someone who's never been involved in a crime before, as my characters often haven't been involved in a crime before, to suddenly murder someone, or to suddenly steal a house, or to suddenly get involved in a deadly feud with a neighbor. What are the extenuating circumstances? What are the previous experiences that have fed into this moment of eruption? Because that's generally what it is in a psychological thriller. It's a kind of escalation that doesn't really come out of the blue. It's usually been simmering. So that's the way I approach characters. But I do think of them as a developing thing. I think of them as, I layer them with each new draft. I'll be layering them. I'll be adding, I'll be thinking more and more about them, how they are physically. How they are physically is almost the last thing I think about. I normally think about their minds first and their life's experience. And then later I might decide how much they weigh, how tall they are, whether they wear glasses, whether they're pretty, whether they're bald, all of this stuff comes later. Their mannerisms and, habits and, gestures and tics and all that sort of thing usually comes later for me.
Yeah. I think that's a really good tip, because a lot of people who are starting out in the writing world might think about their appearance before their character. And the opposite there, someone who's written 18 plus novels is someone who's very experienced and got great success. So that is a great tip, I think, for people stepping into the world of character creation, to think about who they are personally before their physical appearance. I think that's great.
Yeah, the only exception is probably if they're intensely good looking, because that does have such a bearing on your personality. You tend to sort of sail through life with everyone giving you the benefit of the doubt, and so I think you do need to know. And I do occasionally have a kind of Hitchcockian beauty, or just a small town sex kitten type of girl who is a little bit sort of disappointed by having not made it in the big city, because she was the most gorgeous girl in her neighborhood growing up. And so I do think if you're beautiful, you need to know that. And that's not something I would layer in later, because I think that would inform the way they behave and the way the other characters react to them. But most people are fairly standard looking in life. There might just be one. In fact, in this book, Pixie is very good looking. I mean, she's quite sort of alternative in her style, but she is very beautiful. And I think that, she's an object of desire for men, but she's also, someone that Gwen just, like most of us are, you feel kindly to someone who's conventionally attractive. They're lovely to look at and they're nice to have in the room with you, and you want to get to know them. And so, I did need to know that Pixie was going to be good looking, and it was actually going to be a curse rather than a blessing for her.
Yeah. We'll chat obviously in a minute about A Neighbour's Guide to Murder, but again, if you're watching this in the sort of latter part of the show, you can send questions directly to Louise. So if you've got any of them, just put them in the chat and we'll ask them in the final section. But I'm going to ask you about, you mentioned before about claustrophobia on the page. I think that's a really tricky thing to do. So again, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit. Have you got any advice for somebody trying to write claustrophobia in a convincing way, and to sort of extend that over the course of a novel? What would you say to somebody trying to do that?
Well, the easiest way in would be through setting. Your setting is, has a certain amount of confinement and, lack of freedom. Obviously, you've got your mental claustrophobia as well. You've got the confinement of your own mind. But I think your physical setting is a really great place to start. And so, choose a setting that is small, is dark, is noisy, has lots of elements that are making life difficult. And then you can build on that with sort of external things, what's happening in this person's life. Have they just had an eviction notice? Have they just had their heart broken? Have they just had a row with someone? All of these sort of areas of conflict that sort of bring all kinds of stress to bear on you. So you've got both, I think, the physical claustrophobia and then the psychological claustrophobia. So and I see it very much as building it up over the course of a book. I wouldn't start with someone on the point of feeling like they were going to spontaneously combust. I have them build up to that. But certainly for this book, I chose the setting of a mansion block because I wanted all the characters living in the same building. I wanted, there are certain ways the plot develops where they're spying on each other, or you open your door and your nemesis front door is right across the hallway from yours. It feels like there's no escape because and you are therefore in a bit more danger because it's very different from having your own front door and your nemesis is 4 doors down. If they're literally right there on the other side of the wall, I think that's really frightening. And so it's just kind of thinking about what kind of things make you feel imprisoned, what kind of things make you feel like you can't escape, and then including those in your setting, and then also in the character, himself or herself.
All right, amazing. What we're going to have to do before we talk about A Neighbour's Guide to Murder is play a little advert for Amazon KDP, the Storyteller Award that we've been sponsored by Amazon, which is incredible for us. We'll play that advert, and when we come back, hopefully Louise can tell us all about A Neighbour's Guide to Murder. Often the case is that they're already writing the next book and they've forgotten about the last one. I don't think this is the case, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Okay, so we're going to play this trailer, advert trailer, that's only about 30 seconds long or so, and then we're going to get into the amazing cover book that's up above Chris's head. So here we go with the advert. And please, if you are a self-published author and you're looking at going down this route, we'll support you all the way the best we can. So please listen to it, consider it, and we'll leave links in the description. So here it comes. Hey writers, what if Hit and Publish could earn you a massive £20,000?
Oh, yeah, imagine. Well, you don't need to imagine because that's exactly what's on offer with Amazon's Kindle Storyteller Award 2025. This amazing literary prize is back for its 9th year, and it's open to anyone who self-publishes a book like Kindle Direct Publishing in any genre.
Any genre. Yeah, whether you've written your first or your 10th novel, it doesn't matter. If it's unpublished and written in English, then you can enter that award with a chance of winning.
Yeah, and it's really easy to enter. So just publish your book through Kindle Direct Publishing between the 1st of May and the 31st of August, and make sure it's enrolled in KDP Select.
Yep, I think you'd be absolutely mad not to, as a £20,000 prize would help any author boost their career massively. And our previous guest and last year's winner, JD Kirk, said that it took his career to the next level after winning that award and taking it home.
Yeah, and it did. These books are everywhere. So in order to enter, head to amazon.co.uk/storyteller to find out more. The Kindle Storyteller Award is open now. So publish, enter, and get your story out there.
Yeah, we'll support you all the way. You know we will do that. So we'll leave you with this. Good luck. The WCCS, together as one, we get it done. So there you go. Enter the award now before the end of August, and you'll get your chance to win an incredible prize. But we're here to talk about Louise and her last book, her latest book, A Neighbour's Guide to Murder. Louise, can you tell us what that's all about, please?
Yeah, I mean, I've already spoken a little bit about it, but it's set in a swanky mansion block in South London, and our narrator is a 70-year-old woman called Gwen, who is living on a modest pension. She's not wealthy. She's come very badly out of a business going wrong and a divorce where she didn't walk away with very much. So she's quite frugal, and she can account for every penny she spends. And across the hall from her lives a middle-aged former one-hit wonder rocker called Alec, and he is renting out a room. And Gwen is there when a series of people come to view the room, and she can't help noticing that they're all young and female. They're all in their 20s. They're all quite attractive. They're all female. Doesn't seem to have any men among the prospective viewers. And she gets chatting to a girl called Pixie, who tells her that she's actually already secured a flat somewhere else, and she's just here because she loves mansion blocks and it's a sort of property porn viewing, so she's a bit of a time waster. They hit it off, and Gwen doesn't think anything more of her. But the following weekend, she sees this same girl unloading her possessions and moving into the flat next door. So and discovers that she was a victim of a fraud with the flat that she put down a deposit for and 6 months rent. This is a very common scam, which I wanted to include in Pixie's backstory. So she basically is arriving, having been scammed out of all her money, and potentially homeless had Alec not offered her this room. And so they become friends, Gwen and Pixie, and everything is fine for a couple of chapters, just a few brief moments. Everything's fine, and then Gwen starts to have suspicions about what's going on next door. And she is right to have suspicions, because there's a very murky, sordid rental arrangement going on. And once Pixie fesses up to this, Gwen takes the ball and runs with it, and basically escalates it into a big scandal. And all hell breaks loose in the building. So we've got a whole cast of other neighbours. We only ever go into 3 flats. We're mainly in Gwen's flat, keeping it nice and close and claustrophobic. But one of the main themes, I would say, is the rental crisis for young people in their 20s, particularly in big cities like London, but generally in the UK. And because, as well as Pixie and the awful compromises she has to make, we also have Gwen's grown-up son Daniel, who has bounced back. He's a boomerang boy who has his marriage has broken down, and he has just, without even asking, has moved back in with his mum and regressed to sort of his teenage self. So she's got him to deal with. He's always in the shower using up all the hot water and asking her what's for dinner. He's a real selfish pain in the ass. She's also got a daughter who doesn't live on site, but has set herself up as a trad wife. And Gwen is a real sort of old school feminist, and she's extremely confused and ashamed of what Maya, her daughter, has decided to do. And we also have a 4th young person who is a sort of nepo baby figure. She is the daughter of Gwen's frenemy Dee, who is the queen bee of the building, and her daughter Stella is a journalist. And when Pixie's situation escalates, Dee and Stella see an opportunity. So yeah, there's a lot going on in one apparently respectable looking building.
So the big dynamic in this story is Gwen and Pixie's kind of friendship. Gwen being the older character, and then we've got Pixie with the younger character. What was the first thing that kind of drew you to that story in terms of creation, when you have an older character and a younger character in that kind of complex dynamic?
Well, I'm really fascinated by age gap friendships, and I think that we don't see them that much in fiction or on TV. And I think they're very much, especially in cities, they're very much born of the fact that we're usually scattered from our families. And so, in this case, Gwen does have her family close by, but they're deeply unsatisfactory, let's say. He's not getting from them the lovely, sort of mother grown-up child relationship that she would like and that she sees other people enjoying. Meanwhile, Pixie's mother has died. Her father's not in the picture. So they've both got a vacancy. They've both got a vacancy for, in Pixie's case, a mother figure or even a grandmother figure. and in Gwen's case, a young woman who, you know, who might listen to her advice and who she can have a laugh with, who she doesn't have to argue with, and she doesn't have to you know, moan about. So I've always been really intrigued by those sort of friendships born of a kind of mutual need and a, you know, mutual lacking, because I think we do need our families, and you know, so many of us go through our 20s and 30s and 40s with our, you know, our parents on the other side of the country, and you know, not everyone has a great relationship with their siblings if they have siblings at all. And so I really like these friendships where they feel like they have a familial sort of role built in, and that's what it is. But in this case, they just trust too quickly. They trust each other too quickly. It's, you know, the sort of the need is so strong, the hunger for that sort of love and support causes them to jump too quickly into the friendship, I would say.
Yeah. And then on the other side, you've got the relationship one side, and you've got the settings that are kind of like familiar settings to most people, and seemingly safe settings that become kind of less safe neighborhoods. So you're creating these crime sort of situations and suspenseful situations in these normal settings. So why do you think that's so relatable and impactful to the reader, having these settings like the apartment buildings, for example? Why do you think that is such a important part of your story?
Well, I think domestic noir is sort of built on that contradiction, that the very place where you have a right to feel secure and safe and loved is suddenly the place where danger lurks. I mean, that's what domestic noir is. It's you know, it's crime and psychological sort of unease behind closed doors. It's not going out in the street and witnessing a stabbing or getting involved in something. It's happening, you know, in the domestic realm. It's happening either within your family or with your close neighbours. I think it's just incredibly scary for all of us because we can relate to it. And you know, it's not a spy story or a, you know, one of those thrillers where, you know, people are getting into fights and, you know, they're on the run and, you know, they're, you know, using false passports and etc. I mean, it's something that's much more close to home. It's literally in the home. And so I think it is that relatability, and it just, you know, it just makes it's that whole kind of it could happen to you sense of a psychological thriller in domestic noir that I think seduces people, because it's quite a healthy way of working through your own fears and insecurities, reading it happening to someone else on the page.
I can imagine with the feedback you get from these stories in terms of reviews, that you get the people that live in those scenarios or other kind of environments that say, I can see this happening, but also you might get the one or two that think, or have replied that said, this is kind of a situation that I've been in. Has that happened to you?
I have. Very occasionally I will meet people who will tell me that, you know, one of my crimes or domestic noir situations, you know, is really similar to something that's happened to them or someone they know. It tends to be more, rather than the sort of central crime, it tends to be more in some of the details, which I find very pleasing, because I'm hoping to create a familiar environment. So when I was doing my I've just finished my tour for A Neighbour's Guide to Murder, and every time I spoke about Daniel, the adult son who's bounced back, every single time I would see people turn to their friends in the audience and nod and say, and, you know, say, that's you, or that's, rolling their eyes, that's like my situation. And so yes, there's a lot of that about the details, about the sort of peripheral details rather than the central crimes. It would be quite rare for someone to, you know, want to talk about that anyway. I mean, people don't want to necessarily talk about being assaulted or, you know, having suffered a horrific fraud or been burgled. With our house, I did meet a couple of estate agents who knew of crimes a little bit like in the book, where, you know, someone had their house sold without their knowledge or consent. So yeah, it happens occasionally, but it's much more in the detail, I think, than in the central plot.
So we've got about 6 minutes left. People are sending questions in, which is great. So keep doing that. I'm going to ask a question that we asked at Harrogate to people, which is a relatively new one for us. But out of all your books, Louise, do you have a favourite murder?
I don't have many murders in my books, actually. I have accidental killings, and I do have some murders. I would say my favourite, and it also just my favourite plot generally, was The Other Passenger, which does have a murder in it. That's my favorite. That's because that's quite cold-blooded. I mean, of all of my books, that really is a crime book, I would say. That's got cold-hearted people planning something, absolutely horrible. So yes, I would say the murder in The Other Passenger is my favorite.
Brilliant. And we'll keep on the topic of crime with people sending their questions in now. So we've got 5 minutes. So if you've got one and you're watching, send them in. We've got a few already. But Anya says, is there a type of crime you wouldn't write about?
Yes, I'm not intending ever writing about child abuse or child murder.
Yeah.
I just don't want to. It's hugely sensitive, and I think is something that does, so many things don't need a trigger warning, in my opinion, but I think that does need a trigger warning, and I would not want to attempt something so sensitive and get it wrong. But also, I wouldn't want to live inside my head for a year. It takes a year to write a book, and I don't want to write about something so bleak and so heartbreaking, for that length of time. So I would never do that.
Yeah, that's such a valid point. How writers really get stuck into the sort of mental capacity of what they're writing about.
Yeah,
and, it's a tough job. Writing anyway, the dedication and time and effort it takes to do that, but then to be in the character's mind as well. I think that a lot of readers don't really appreciate what that tends to be for the writer.
No. I mean, remember A Little Life, imagine, I mean, that probably took years to write, not 1 year. And, I just can't imagine how she must have felt writing that book. And I don't want to find out.
Yeah.
So another question from Paul's got two, but this is the first one. So who's been your biggest inspiration when writing your books? I think we touched on it a little bit. But...
Yeah, we touched on Agatha Christie. There's also Patricia Highsmith as a big influence on me because, I think she made the idea of having the dislikable characters somehow being able to twist it so you're rooting for them. And people do find my characters dislikable, and yet they do root for them. And I think that I've learned a lot from her in sort of just being able to present these flawed people and, trying to pull you in so you're still half hoping it's going to be okay, even though they probably have done some quite horrible things. So Patricia Highsmith. And then more recently, I was quite late in discovering Barbara Vine, who I just think is, I think her books are absolutely incredible. Obviously a pseudonym for Ruth Rendell, but I prefer them to the Ruth Rendells, which I love as well. But A Dark Adapted Eye and A Fatal Inversion, they're two books that have had a massive influence on me in recent years, I would say.
Brilliant.
So one of the questions we ask, and I'm intrigued to know your answer to this, is if you could take say one of your characters and put them into another story or any story that you've ever read or discovered, what character would you take of yours and put them into another story? And do you know what that story would be?
Oh my God, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I would take any of them. I don't think I would unleash my characters on any other world. But I do think that I would like to bring in some other characters into my stories because they could have a good influence on my characters. So I think in this one, I'd love someone like Dickens's Little Dorrit. Or one of his lovely, sweet young female characters, very virtuous and very kind and quiet. I'd like one of those living on this corridor in Columbia Mansions. I think that she could be a really good influence on these hot-headed characters. And, maybe even, turn it into a more discreet drama rather than a murder story.
Nice.
Yeah.
Paul's second question is, which has been your favorite book to write?
Well, I loved writing this one, actually. I would say, I mean, I know it's hard because it's the freshest in my mind, so I do tend to favor my last book. But I have really enjoyed writing Gwen, and I think I have created a really interesting character who, you know, there just aren't that many of her age and complexity that I've read recently. And, you know, we are in a kind of youth obsessed world, you know, of course we are. And I just, you know, I really enjoyed, you know, spending time in the head of someone who's lived 7 decades, and has had a lot of experience and seen a lot of trends, and also just seen how the role of women has developed. And so, yeah, so I think that it has been my favorite one to write. And also being a first person, you know, single narrator, it was a bit of a smoother process. Some of my books are incredibly intricately complicated in terms of their narrative structure, and this was just a little simpler. And so, you know, that was a really enjoyable experience to just keep things simple.
I mean, it's so sort of like, we got other questions to ask before we wrap this up, but should have asked this a while back, where you have your older character and you have your younger characters. How is that writing process, and how do you get into the minds of, say, an older character and write in the mindset of somebody who's got very different views and opinions on the world, and then someone who has, on the opposite side, different views and opinions from a younger perspective? How do you balance that in the right way?
Well, I mean, I've chosen not to balance it. Had Pixie been a narrator as well, that would have been, you know, an amazing question that I would have a different answer to. But because Gwen is our only narrator, I chose her expressly because I didn't think I would be able to get inside the head of a 20-something. But equally, I wanted to show the 20-something experience, you know, in all its, you know, extremities. And so, you know, I very deliberately chose an older narrator, so I could view their behavior and, you know, their situations through that older person's lens. And that was what made it so much fun to write, because, you know, she doesn't understand a lot of what they're saying. She doesn't understand a lot of the decisions they're having to make. It's a completely different world. You know, she's constantly thinking, oh my God, why did my generation, you know, burn our bras for these girls who now want to just bake muffins and be influencers? And so I deliberately didn't take you inside the head of the younger characters, because that would have been very hard to balance. I would have had to have spent a lot of time with 20-somethings before I attempted that.
Yeah, definitely.
To wrap up the show, and sort of in jest of, obviously, A Neighbour's Guide to Murder, a viewer's guide to finding Louise. So where can people stalk you if they want to? Where can people pick up your books and things like that?
Well, books you can get from, you know, your local bookshop, and, you know, of course, you can always order and, you know, online from Amazon, but you should find copies in Waterstones, in some of the supermarkets. But, you know, I always urge people to go to their local indie if they can. There are some signed copies out there, which, you know, you can find out about from my social media. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. If you want stuff like, you know, photos of mansion blocks that were the inspiration for the book, Instagram's the best place.
Yeah.
If you want to find out about events and offers and best prices for all of my books, including my backlist, then probably Facebook or X would be the best place.
Brilliant. And before we go, Louise, obviously you mentioned about going to Harrogate, and I did a weird thing this week when somebody said to me, "Oh, do you want a drink from the bar?" And I said, "Surprise me." And everyone,
yeah, you did.
Everyone around me was like, "What? You can't say that." But if we were to surprise you with the drink next year, what would be what were we buying?
Oh my God! Well, it wouldn't be a surprise if I told you. But if you wanted to know what my favorite drink is, I am really 1970s in my taste for alcohol. So it tends to be French, and so my dream first drink of the evening is a Kir Royale.
Nice.
I love a Kir Royale.
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, well that is creme de cassis, so like a black currant liqueur, topped with champagne. So it's pink.
Ooh.
It's really 70s.
Love that. We'll try and get you on next year, Louise.
Thank you. I shall hold you to that.
Yeah, no, do. We will remember. Yeah, but it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting to us and giving us so much good advice as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure anyone who watches will definitely pick up some really good tips.
Can I ask one more question?
Much for having
one
me.
more question
Yes,
before we go.
Of course, yeah.
So you've written over 18 books and you've had an incredible career. What one piece of advice would you have wanted, looking back on what you've done so far and what you know now, when you first started out writing? What one piece of advice would you give yourself going back to that day?
In terms of writing, I would say, don't worry about the long term. Just focus on the moment. Just focus on the piece of work in front of you. And ultimately that's the bit that you can control as the writer is the book, is the story. So focus on that. Don't get too distracted by the other stuff. But on the kind of publishing career business side of things, I would tell myself to say no more often, because I've said yes to lots of things and then I've ended up being stressed out, or double booked, or I've had to sacrifice the writing time because I've been doing too much other stuff. So they would be my two pieces of advice. But I think ultimately focus on the writing. Your job is to write, and enjoy it, because that's also the best bit.
Absolutely. What great advice that is. Thank you so much, Louise. Again, brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Brilliant story. Guys, please go and follow Louise. We'll leave the links to A Neighbour's Guide to Murder in the description. Go and pick it up. It's a fantastic book that you want to read. And I'm sure some of the people in the audience already might have already bought that, as they tend to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And look after yourselves. Have a fantastic weekend. And hopefully we will see Louise at Harrogate next year. And we can buy that amazingly sounding drink that I would like to try. And we'll get to chat to you at the festival. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.